But
hello, everyone. It's nice to be on the international final round of the Economics Olympiad. My name is Martina Bacíková. I'm a founder and CEO of INEV, which is the organization which organizes the International Economics Olympiad. Welcome. This is our panel here on the international final round, and we will be discussing a very interesting topic today. And it's very actual, and I hope we will learn a lot from our speakers today. The panel is called "How the COVID-19 Crisis Affected International Trade and How to Build Resilience for the Similar Situations." I'm looking forward to discuss it. And we will move to introducing our speakers shortly. To all the students who tested yesterday, I hope the written test wasn't too hard for you, and we hope to see some of you tomorrow on the oral exam, and we will be also announcing the results tomorrow. So looking forward to see you soon, and let's move on to our discussion. We will start with a presentation from Professor Panagiotis Liargovas, who prepared like a 10-minute introduction for the topic, and then we will follow up with a discussion with everyone, the speakers, hopefully you too, because we are streaming on YouTube, and you can post questions. I will see them, and I will ask our speakers about them for you. So Mr. Panagiotis Liargovas is a president of the Center of Planning and Economic Research and a professor at the Department of Economics of University of Peloponnese, Greece. So Mr. Liargovas, the floor is yours, and please share with us your presentation, and we are happy to learn.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me and being part of this wonderful team, and be with you and discuss some very interesting issues that are happening in our world. And of course, we have seen tremendous changes during the last years, 1.5 years, due to the pandemic. And the pandemic has affected everything. It has affected our GDP, it has affected our trade, it has affected FDIs. Actually, in my short presentation, I will focus after introduction on some key trends that we observe in our world in relation to trade, to international trade. And then, of course, the policy implications, the main question is how to build resilience for similar situations, for similar crises in the future, because it's for sure that in the future we will have more crises. The COVID-19 has had some substantial impacts on the world economy. In 2020, world real GDP fell by 3.6%. The volume of world merchandise trade declined by 5.3%, and foreign direct investment flows dropped by 42%. Supply chains have been disrupted, and both supply and demand shocks transmitted through supply chains and propagated across borders. COVID-19 is as contagious economically as it is medically. A number of studies, and there are a lot so far, have shown that the COVID-19 has had large negative impacts on global supply chains, international trade and the subjective uncertainty in global firms. Some of the most important key trends regarding international trade. The first one, I think, is that the pandemic affected services trade more than goods trade. Services trade more than goods trade. Services trade fell by more than 20% in 2020, almost 4 times the decline in goods trade. So we have one stylized fact, and we can see this figure here, where we observe the goods trade and the services trade, the drops, of course, in total trade. And of course, we see this stylized fact that services trade was affected much more than goods trade. And the explanation is that the COVID restrictions is due to the COVID restrictions, actually, to the lockdowns that we all faced. While restrictions curtailed the service sector, goods trade recovered fast as factory shutdowns were limited and there was a surge in demand for some durable goods, for example, furniture, carpets and appliances, and so on. Another observation, you can see it in this chart, is that during the COVID shock, this last year's and continuing this year shock, world trade fell by less than during the global financial crisis shock in 2009. Despite the significantly larger decline in global GDP, almost twice. So we have almost twice decline in GDP, but we have much less decline in trade. This is because services represent the majority of economic activity in advanced economies, but only around a quarter of global trade. So we have a different picture in 2020 with the COVID compared to 2009 with the global financial crisis. Another fact, another stylized fact is that the impact of COVID shock on trade was different across countries. We don't have an homogeneous picture, a similar picture. In particular, we had the fall in Chinese trade, which was much smaller than in other regions, not only in China, but all over East Asian countries. East Asian countries that are well integrated in the global value chains have led the way to recovery. Low-income countries, unlikely, and less globally integrated regions, for example, in Latin America, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa, continue to lag in the trade recovery, with imports still down 15 to 20% year on year in December. So we have a completely different picture between the East Asian countries. China, of course, is the leading country, and the developing countries, the other developing countries, Latin America and Caribbean, and Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, which countries still lag behind. Another stylized fact is that the pandemic has had a significant impact on shipping costs. I think in all the countries, we observe a tremendous increase in shipping costs by around 350% since May 2020. You can see this tremendous increase in shipping costs here. Of course, imbalances in regional trade brought about by the pandemic have contributed to this rise in shipping costs. In particular, increased demand for durable goods in lockdown economies combined with COVID-related disruption in the ports of those countries exacerbated the shortage of shipping containers. Containers became stuck in the US and Europe rather than return to Asia. To my opinion, this shortage of shipping containers is likely to be temporary and ultimately fade. However, shipping costs could remain elevated in the near future, supported by the strength in manufacturing and the recent commodities boom, partly driven by the recovery in economic outlook across the globe. And finally, another fact, another key trend is that international firms, those firms that were involved in global value chains, were more exposed to the COVID crisis. You can see a figure here where there are some, where we have international and domestic, an international and a domestic firm. And from the right, and on the right and the left, we have the supply and demand shocks. You can see that international firms were hit by both foreign supply and demand and domestic foreign supply and domestic shocks, as well as foreign and domestic demand shocks. Unlikely, domestic firms were only hit by domestic demand shocks. So we have a different impact of the COVID-19 to the firms, depending on the degree of internationalization of firms. So, of course, there are many other, one could add a lot of other impacts of the COVID-19. I only concentrated on 4. And the question then is how to build resilience for similar situations. And what to do actually, how you can protect, let's say, how you can offer a kind of effective protection. We cannot, of course, we are in a world of free trade and global and mobility. I think the response is that I will give you the response later, but some of the responses are based on automation and reshoring, which allow for more flexible adjustment to change in demand, mitigating firms' risks in the event of the pandemic. But I don't think that this is the best response. I don't think that reshoring can solve the problem, and it's difficult. It's very complex to go back to closed borders and do reshoring. Actually, there are many difficulties in doing so. And if you see the reality, we do not observe as much reshoring of firms after this pandemic. What I think is the solution, let's say, the solution, to my opinion, can be focus on 2 things. One is the strengthening of regional value chains. Especially, this is important for developing countries, so as to diversify risk. I don't say that they should stop the global value chains. Of course, the global value chains will be there, but strengthening regional value chains reduces vulnerability and increases resilience to foster industrial development. So in parallel, this, to my opinion, could be done. And another important issue, I think the name actually of the game in resilience is diversification within and across countries. Not absolute self-reliance, of course, but diversification. So if a supplier cannot provide a particular component, alternative suppliers should be online that are able to fill that vacuum quickly. The firms also build resilience by expanding the inventory stocks of raw materials or intermediate inputs and finished goods. Previously, inventories were not part of the toolkit. It was just in-time production. This is what we had so far, just-in-time production. Now the idea that you have to encourage redundancies to avoid bottlenecks is hinting on. Another component is automation. So diversification and automation. When I say automation, I mean digitalization, which help firms map the suppliers' networks. I think I will stop here, and I'll be in your disposal for questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this great introduction. I believe you touched all the topics which we mentioned we want to discuss today. So thank you for that. I heard a few very interesting things which we definitely touch later in the discussion. In the meantime, I would love to introduce our second speaker, who is a professor at the Budapest Business School and a professor of Hungarian University of Agriculture and Life Sciences. His name is György Iván Neszmélyi. And he's here because our original speaker, Tomáš Josef Kozák, couldn't attend. So thank you so much that you could come and contribute to this discussion. Welcome. And I just want to open it with giving you a floor for maybe reacting and discussing what you notice in the presentation, and we can move on from that. I already see a few really good questions from the YouTube stream, so we will go fast to answer them later. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Ms. Bacíková, and I wish to greet all the participants of this session. In fact, Tomáš Josef Kozák is my direct colleague, so we are very closely working together. And as we both work for the Department of Commerce at Budapest Business School, we merely focused on the domestic impacts of the COVID crisis, but I can still complement my knowledge in this field. Because this is not the original research topic for myself, but we saw that the drop-off of the Hungarian foreign trade activity due to COVID, disrupting a very positive trend that after the post-2008 and 2009 crisis, which hit Hungary, maybe Hungary was hit as number 2 after Greece at that time. But since 2012, we have had a very positive trend in our foreign trade balance. From 2012 till 2019, each year we had a growing positive balance in foreign trade. But as a peculiar characteristic of the Hungarian economy, maybe other countries as well, perhaps Czech Republic is a bit similar too. in this respect that the majority of the export is generated by the locally planted multinational companies. In case of Hungary, at least 70–80%. So the impressive export figures before the COVID crisis, we could thank merely to the big international companies and not, of course, not to the Hungarian small and medium-sized companies. And the trick, was not a secret. It is done by many countries who are facing the troubles of the middle income trap. Hungary definitely does. So our companies, if I can call the multinational companies as well, who are here with us, could operate to getting more and more integrated to the international value chains, as Professor Liargovas also pointed out that the international value chains were disrupted, and that was one of the major reasons of the drop-off, even in case of Hungary and probably mainly in case of many other countries. The other problem I wish to point out was the absolute, I would say, nearly bankruptcy of the tourism and hospitality industry. The faculty from which I'm working in my main job is a faculty of commerce and hospitality and tourism. So we directly feel the impact in Hungarian tourism, inbound and outbound tourism. The lockdown was really a disaster that people could not travel. The domestic tourism was not so strong enough. I mean, in purchasing power and spendings that could substitute the revenues from the foreign tourists. And I think in many other countries, probably in Greece as well, you could feel so. And the third problem I experience in Hungary, and this is a peculiar characteristics, because I think in Czech Republic you did not experience similar changes. At the beginning of the crisis, in the first couple of weeks, the Hungarian currency lost at least 10–15% of its value against the US dollar, and almost the same extent it lost the value against the euro. Maybe it was not without any reason, and our national bank did not really react to prevent that this should happen. But it is always a delicate discussion, and I don't want to divert this discussion to this direction, but as Czech Republic, Poland and Hungary is still not a member of the euro area, I like to compare the situation to Slovakia, Slovenia and the Baltic states, in which the euro currency was introduced already many years ago, and feel the difference. Who is more successful? Who insists to keep its own currency and sovereignty proudly, or those who became a part of the pan-European economic system and financial system? Sorry for talking too much and maybe a little bit diverting the topic of conversation. So I wish to give back the floor to you.
Well, thank you for contributing to this discussion. We might be joined by another speaker, Bogusław Fiodor from Poland, but I understood there are some technical difficulties which we might be able to solve, hopefully, so we may be joined later by a third speaker, but the floor is ours here, because I'm really excited about discussing what you said. There was mentioned the shipment cost, the inflation, and I think the questions are also running around the inflation, which the public is really worried about. The results from the economics Olympiad, because we measure the data from the students, and we know that they follow the actual events, they read the news. So they read about inflation, but at the same time, the questions in macroeconomics, the results are kind of bad. So the conclusion is that the students, they read about inflation and it's in front of their faces, but they don't really know what it means, what it is. So maybe I will open a discussion about the inflation discussion. Should we be worried? And does the big inflation is big inflation coming? And in which sectors we might be expecting the prices to go up? So I would ask Professor Liargovas to maybe react to this question.
Okay, thank you. I think inflation is a problem currently in most of the countries, and I think there are many reasons for this. One of the reasons is due to the increase of shipping costs. I saw just before that shipping costs increased by 350%. In some cases, in some countries, it was even larger. So it's very expensive now to ship some traded goods. So this has transferred to final goods, and prices have gone up. So one is the shipping costs increase, and this is, of course, is due to the drop to the stop of the value chain of because of the lockdowns. Okay, a second cause is related to the increase in the oil price. The OPEC oil price, OPEC production was decreased, so prices went up, and many goods are depending on oil and the price of oil. So we've seen inflation due to oil increase. And a third reason is related to the climate change, to the disasters that, especially in raw materials, in some primary goods and raw materials, we have this climate change, and a lot of production was destroyed, and therefore prices went up. So, to my opinion, yes, we have this pressure in prices. We observe this in Europe. We observe in Greece. I think in all countries. In the inflation in the Eurozone was about, on average, I think it was 3% on average, around 3% on average. In some cases, in some countries, it was much higher. It was about 5%. In some was less. But all over, we have inflation pressure. So, to my opinion, this pressure will fade as we go to the end of the end of the year. By the end of the year, it will fade because global value chains will be normalized again. It takes there is some time lag. It takes some time to recover and be normal again. So I guess this will last until the end of the year. And also there's a last, just one final reason for this increase in prices. In many countries, there is an increased demand for inventories. So China has increased its demand, Southeast Asia. So because they all want to have inventories and just in case for bad times and increase their demand. So there are some temporary effects, but my opinion is that by the end of the year, this pressure will fade, and we will have less inflation in 2022.
You mentioned that the inflation might go back to normal in a way.
Yes.
Do you mean also the prices? Should we expect the prices to go to normal again, or is it more about people just have like very small inflation, which is usual, at least in Europe? Which one?
Yes, they will go back to, I think.
Also with the prices. So the prices
yes,
will go.
Yes, price will go down.
It's interesting. Hey, what about Professor Neszmélyi about the inflation pressures, and maybe like how it affects a common consumer around the world?
It's thank you. It's really difficult to add anything more to the very comprehensive and thorough analysis that Professor Liargovas added now. And from a Hungarian view, well, as you well know, we are not a part of the euro area yet. The inflation rate reaches now about 5% in Hungary, which, well, we can feel in certain items like the fuel, first and foremost. The fuel prices increased at least 50% since the bottom of the early 2020s, when the oil prices were really cheap. Plus all the foodstuffs, the price of food and through this the living costs increased, I would say, much more than just 5%. However, economists, at least from the government side, definitely try to emit an optimistic view that it will go back. The inflation will be lower next year. So our national bank and the economic administration tries to keep it under control. So comparing to the economic crisis of 2008 and 9, or comparing to the change of the regime that we all experienced, the Czech Republic and Poland as well, in the turn of the 1980s and 90s, where the inflation rate in Hungary was nearly 40% in the first half of the 90s. Comparing to those very periods, it is still, I would say, a modest extent, however, not desirable. We really trust, people really trust that it will be better and there will be no such a serious lockdown that happened in the recent 1.5 years, as well, complete industries went to bankruptcies, thousands of people lost their jobs, so the unemployment slightly increased. We had before the COVID crisis, we had 3.4 or something like this, and now it is over 4%. It's still much less than the post-2008 crisis, when it went up over 8%. But still we can feel it. This little percentage still means thousands of people, especially in the hospitality and in the tourism industry. But not only this, our car manufacturers like Audi in György or Mercedes in Kecskemét city, they also stopped for several months last year and even this year. So this also had a serious impact on the industrial capacity as well. And as for the question whether the prices will go down again if the inflation goes down, I don't know if it is a very specific phenomenon in Hungary. Even I tried in some of my papers I wrote about this topic, that I think in the entire Central and Eastern European region, Hungary is the only one who has the same currency which was introduced after the Second World War. There was no change. We still have the same Hungarian forint. Even the banknotes look and the coins look differently, but it is exactly the same currency. But that time, for one single forint, you could even have a lunch in a restaurant. You know, you can't even have for 1,000 forint. You need at least 3,000 or 4,000 forint. So the gradual lose of the currency, nobody could do or even wanted to do anything, because especially since the change of the regime, it was a principle based on the liberal economic philosophy that the weak currency is good as it can help the export. And well, we reached a situation that even the inflation went down in the recent 10 years before COVID, but it always happens that the prices remain the same. At least they go up a little bit more slowly higher, and the salaries usually follow it afterwards. So it never happened that the prices went down, at least not for a longer time, but the growing prices pull up the salaries, and always it is going up and up and up. It is maybe a peculiar or strange to hear from people in the Eurozone. I don't know in Eurozone countries how it happens in the practice, but well, since euro currency exists, I did not experience too many times that the prices went down. Even the closest part in Slovakia, at the beginning, I could have a good lunch for €4. Now I have to pay nearly 20 for the same meal in a restaurant.
I might have a question and connected with the Gábor Miklós Nagy questions from YouTube, because we mentioned multiple times the normal state, going back to normal in a way. And I'm interested, how do you define the normal? Because we talked about 2022, that the things might go back to normal, but a lot of discussions are around what the new normal will look like. And Gábor Miklós Nagy asks, COVID ruined or restructured the supply chains? It is a longer term effect, a constant change in the structure of globalization, or the world trade will return to its state before the pandemic? So we have this discussion about inflation, what is the new normal, but maybe connected also with the supply chains effect and the kind of delayed globalization because of COVID, and maybe going a few steps back. So how the new normal in international trade and inflation might look like maybe in 2022 or even further. And I would ask Mr. Neszmélyi to continue.
It is very difficult to say what will be next year, as I am not a future teller. And also it is, I think it's somewhat subjective judgment that what you consider normal. As I am an academician, not a politician. If I were a politician, I would say that, okay, what we can still consider normal, it's according to the European Union's criteria, that possibly should be under 3%. Similarly to the budgetary deficit. But in my personal judgment, if the inflation is not two-digit inflation, it can still be kept under control. So 5% is okay, it is more than it should be, but it is still not a tragedy. If there will be no longer and no serious limitations and lockdowns again, I hope the economy will resurrect. This I would say it was an unprecedented situation. I think since generations ago we did not experience such restrictions. The elder generation, including me, or even the older ones in the socialist times, of course. But if you think about just the fact that one of the major principles of the European Union, the free movement of people, how the earth can it happen that European Union members are making lockdown at the border for several months or even a full year? That happened even in Hungary or even in other countries, and you are still controlled like in the socialist time nearly, waiting in the queue at the borders. It is such an obstacle not only for the tourism, but also in case of the transportation, when the trucks have to wait again at the border of Croatia or Romania for half day, not without any reason, as Professor pointed out several times, the increase of the shipping prices. I think this bureaucracy is quite unnecessary, I would say, should be very strongly simplified, as thanks to the vaccines that were introduced nearly a year ago could diminish the risk of COVID. And what I wish to still point out that I don't really see the European Union found a proper answer for these questions. There are a lot of discussions going on in the European Parliament and in the Commission, but still how to keep the European economy over the surface, how to cope with the changing global economic trends. As a professor also mentioned, that happened in China, but I would also add that the China-America trade relationship also changed somewhat since the president of the US is not Donald Trump any longer. I know, again, I took the way of conversation a little bit away from the main topic, but this is all in my mind, and I think they are related to each other. Mm-hmm. So back to the original question. Again, a lot of if must be in my consideration, that if the fourth wave of Delta variant will not hit Hungary and the other European countries seriously, and if the governments will treat all the situation by a selective and maybe more efficient but not so harsh way, then the economy can be saved for a further increase of inflation and a further crisis, and all the economies can revert to the original track. If it will happen in 2022, I will be very happy. I'm afraid it will take a little bit longer, maybe 3 years.
Yes. What about Professor Liargovas? What about the supply chains and inflation? Will we go back to normal?
Well, I agree with the professor that it's difficult to define normality. I mean, it's very difficult, and there are many ifs to discuss for the future. I mean, it's I think, of course, the whole world will be affected, and I don't know if in the pre-COVID era we had, I don't know if this was the normality or if what is going to be built in the future will be the normality. Let me give you an example of just to think how deep the global value chains were and still are but mostly before, in the pre-COVID-19 era. Let me give you, for example, in order to produce a mobile phone, Samsung relies on something like 2,500 suppliers. 2,500 suppliers for a mobile phone. iPhone 12 has more than 1,600 parts, different parts. The camera and display come from Japan, the RAM from South Korea, and so on. And another example, an electronic commuter bike that is sold in the United States is another example. The tires come from Indonesia, and Indonesia contributes 1.7% to the total value added. The motor is from Germany, which contributes 25% value added. The brakes are from China, 1.8% value added. The gears are from Japan. The seat is from Italy, and so on. So we had a world which global value chains were very dominant. I'm not sure if, of course, there will be global value chains after the pandemic, but I don't know if they will be in that previous form so integrated, or have a different, or if we have a different picture. I think we will see many changes. I think we will live very interesting times in the future. A lot of investment will go to health sector, to digital, to transformation. So many things will take place at the same time. That's why it's very complex. That's why it's very difficult to have a clear picture of the future normality. So it's a difficult task, but the one that I can say for sure is that there will be a lot of changes, many changes.
Yes, I also like how you mentioned the climate change as one of the pressures. This is a complex discussion about the future we have. I may just go for a question from Simon Florek, who asks kind of a related question. Do you expect foreign direct investments to rebound along with the global markets recovery? So it's kind of a follow-up, but maybe if we focus it on this discussion on this part, I'll be interested what you think about this too. Maybe Professor Liargovas, if you could continue.
I think what we have already mentioned about trade is more or less the same discussion, because for FDI, due to uncertainty, increased uncertainty, FDI was dropped. As long as we move to more normalized trends, then FDI will start increasing again. So it will recover, but following trade. Trade was had a much faster recover, especially goods trade, and I think FDI will follow.
I have another question from Gabor Miklos Nagy, which is very interesting, and it's related to the global complex world we are talking about and the pressures from all sides. And the question is, does the role and the importance of the artificial intelligence grow in the foreign trade after the pandemic? Is it growing in many areas of the economy? What about trade? Yes, artificial intelligence, how does this connect to the after COVID world, and is it accelerated by the crisis? Professor Neszmélyi, if you could react to this question, it would be great.
Thank you very much. To be very frank, I am not a specialist of artificial intelligence, so I would lie, or I would just divert the discussion again. But my opinion is that the artificial intelligence, the applicability is really very wide, and it is really growing in all areas, irrespectively from COVID. So I don't really see, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm not very much up to date in the applicability of this very special field. But I think it is developing even without COVID and also with COVID. But if the floor is at the moment is at me, let me still mention something, just adding to the discussion what is normal and what is not normal. So as a professor of a University of Applied Sciences, I really wish to be more practical than theoretical, but just for a short moment, let me recall the classic theories of the economy, especially or typically in the so-called capitalist economies in the recent couple of hundreds of years, that we accept the fact that the economy is cyclic, there are cycles, shorter and longer term cycles are happening in the economy. So if we go back to the past or to the deeper past, there were always crises and prosperity periods that followed each other. Long-term like Kondratev cycles or the shorter-term cycles, it is very normal in the economy. I would say that every 10 years or every 20 years, there is some kind of critical period, perhaps by different concrete reasons. But since there is an overproduction, there is a chance for overproduction in the industry. We can go back to the Industrial Revolution when the serial production started, that the industry can produce more goods than people want to buy or want to consume. Plus, if I add that the government's responsibility to hide the problems, at least as they can do it by printing more and more new money. So the generation of the inflation. Now the actual real physical production and the financial side of the global economy are so much distant from each other that I think it is pre-coded that sooner or later there must be some cyclical impact like a crisis. So I think economic thinkers and politicians, if they cooperate, they try to diminish the impacts of this crisis, but I'm afraid it is not fully avoidable. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this contribution. I particularly find the artificial intelligence question interesting because a lot of pop culture in how the world will look like in 10, 20, 100 years is around the Yuval Noah Harari's book, 21 Lessons for 21st Century, which I, by the way, recommend. That one of the conclusions of his book is the future of humanity will largely rely on the development of artificial intelligence and biotechnology. So that's why this question of artificial intelligence, whether this is accelerated by COVID or not, is I found interesting. But I understand this is not our particular expertise necessarily here. And so maybe Professor Liargovas, do you have anything you would want to add to the discussion about artificial intelligence?
Yes, I would like to add that yes, some multinational corporations will certainly rethink the strategies and give more relevance to artificial intelligence and generally to automation to mitigate risks. But to my opinion, it is unlikely that the entire supply chains will be automated in the near future. Why? Because currently there is a shortage of skilled workers. Multinational corporations, a lot of multinational corporations might find this desirable, but on the other hand, you need some skilled workers to make this transformation of the whole supply chain. So, yes, to a certain degree, to some degree, we will see this artificial intelligence, but not to the whole supply chain. I think it will take more time to adjust to this change. I don't see it in the near future, but in some decades, yes, of course, we will move. But it's difficult. It's not easy to make this transformation all at once.
Yes, it might be still too early for artificial intelligence to be dominant in the trade industry. Interesting. We have another kind of geopolitical question, but I think we see this in media and the pressures are clear. And the question is from Alex Zamborsky. What do you think about the rising influence of China in global trade with developing countries, but like building infrastructure loans to countries in Africa and Asia? Do you see it as a as a normal development, or like, or is it possibly a threat? So I'm interested, Professor Liargovas, if you could react to this question.
China has recovered more quickly than European countries and United States. In the near future, we will see China as the biggest, one of the big. It is currently one of the biggest, but we will see more strengthened China economically in the future. So yes, it is it continues to increase its power, economic power, and I don't know if this is translated as a threat to the United States or Europe, but this is the reality that China has gained ground during the last years, and it will continue to do so.
Yes, it seems kind of unavoidable, the China's growth, and even exceeding the US growth. So that's kind of where we might be seeing the global geopolitical situation going, which might be interesting to watch how the power dynamics will be, because the US also seem they don't really like the influence of China growing, and we can see it in past years that they try hard not to let them, but maybe the letting someone grow in comparison with a discussion about China is not their decision in their power anymore, which is interesting after the.
And we had recently this agreement with the United States, Australia, and UK on cooperating in I don't know how this will shape future relations in the global trade and in the global economy, but we see that it is rather that China will continue to gain power, economic power. I mean.
Yes. Also, we see that the United States, they were the first for dozens of years in the world, and it might be hard there to accept that they are not that way anymore, and it might be even worse in the next years. Follow-up question from Gábor Miklós Nagy again. According to your expectations, will the trade war continue between the United States and China? Professor Neszmélyi, this is you can answer this question or add to the discussion.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just guessed that Gábor Miklós Nagy is my compatriot. I don't know who he is. I would be interested. Is he a professor or if he's a student? I would like still to talk about the previous topic, if you don't mind, because this is much closer to my sphere of interest, as I had the privilege to live several years in Africa, and also I am a head of research of the Oriental Business and Innovation Center of Budapest Business School, so I have a much better view on the China-Africa relations or China developing countries relations than on the artificial intelligence. The reason why China could so successfully and speedily expand in Africa and in a modest extent in other developing parts of the world is that the majority of China's development projects are carried out in the frames of various ODA projects. And if we have a look at the ODA projects carried out by the United States or carried out by the European Union, there are always political criteria, and African countries don't like this. African countries, in majority of cases, like cheap entrepreneurs and those who do the job and don't want to demand anything else. And this is the secret of China. I had the privilege to live more than 2 years in Nigeria, witnessing that the Chinese companies take over the majority of the projects in agriculture, in water management, in railway construction, and so on. And this was purely the reason. When the European Union launches a project, wants to follow up where the money goes and whether the country develops in terms of human rights, in good governance, in the right of the female, and so on. And the local governments don't really like this. They rather give the project to China, who go there in person. They bring the Chinese workers, they bring everything there, do the project, and what they need is not political. They need seaports, they need oil, they need other raw materials for the production, and they get it. It's so simple. And the same about the US. The US aid and other American agencies who really want to launch a lot of projects, they face the same problem. China makes the job and doesn't want to spread its ideology, the communist ideology or whatsoever. But while the European Union and the United States want to create democracy, we could see in Afghanistan what is the result of democracy. I lived in Egypt another 2 years during the period of the Arab Spring. People don't even know what democracy is. If the emir or if the local king says whom to vote for, they vote for that person. So it is a daydream to bring democracy in a short run to these countries, and that's why China is doing very smart. Of course, Chinese economy needs raw materials and oil. Since 2000, China is not an oil exporter. It used to be an oil exporter in the deeper past, but now needs more and more oil and can bring from Africa and from other developing countries. So I think I think this is the secret. It is another case if it is a risk or it is a bless for countries like European countries as well. Even in Hungary, there are projects already that are financed from Chinese loan or Chinese contribution. I think the role of the local governments is really very, very big, because there are good and also bad examples. Sri Lanka, Djibouti, in Europe, I think Montenegro faces really serious problems because they undertook such investments from Chinese side, even from cheap Chinese bank loan, which I think they will not be able to pay back, like the highway in Montenegro to the sea, like the seaport development in Djibouti, also in Sri Lanka. There is a new terminology, the debt trap, the Chinese debt trap policy, as it whispers the phenomenon that China purposefully wants to chase these countries to bankruptcy. I am not really sure that it is true. China, I think, would be much more interested that these countries should function on a normal way and would create benefit, of course, for China as well, through its global economic expansion network, which is called OBORT, like one belt, one road, in various land road and maritime roadways. And I think in longer run, China can be even stronger by this, depending on in other fields how China will behave and cooperate with other big powers, of course, because there are a lot of smaller or bigger problems around China. It is very important how China will react in the issue of the South China Sea issue. Can China cooperate and live in peace with the neighbors, first of all with Vietnam and the Philippines and other ASEAN countries? There is the issue of Taiwan, which is still not a fully solved question. And who knows what will happen in the two Koreas. This is also China's direct neighborhood. I don't think that in a foreseeable future the two Koreas will reunite to a single state, but definitely China would not be very happy to have an even stronger competitor, nor Japan. I know I again led far the topic of conversation, so let's go back to the original question that the global impacts, if I remember well.
Actually, I would like to continue with the topic you said, because I think it's quite interesting.
You
mentioned, for example, countries like Montenegro who borrowed, in a way, the Chinese investment are so high they might never pay the Chinese. So what are the scenarios that could happen? Because I know there are more countries than Montenegro in Europe which might have similar problem. So what will happen when they can't pay the Chinese debt, or the investments are too strong there?
Again, I wish to point out that I am not a future teller and sincerely hope that it will not happen a full bankruptcy. In that case, China secured itself in the original agreement, as far as I know, that in that case, China will have, I don't want to say the wrong figures, but maybe for 100 years, China will get a concession over a seaport or other assets of the country. In Djibouti, as far as I read or heard, they did it. So they have a seaport at the Horn of Africa, at the entrance of the Red Sea, for a long time in Chinese concession. Furthermore, as far as I know, in Djibouti, even a Chinese military base was established. So China is doing very smart. China will never allow that the debtors should not pay back the money. In case of Montenegro, what I read in the news that some correspondent raised up the issue that in case of a bankruptcy, would the European Union help Montenegro or not? As it is a fact that Montenegro is not a part of the European Union, why would it do so? Okay, in the further future, definitely, potentially, Montenegro should be a new member in a longer run, but definitely not in a close future it will be. So it is still an open question.
If I'm correct, Professor Liargovas, I think Greece has a similar issue, not that harsh, but regarding the problem with China having influence over these countries through debt and investment, what's your point of view to this topic?
No, I think, well, I'm not an expert on the field, but I agree with what Professor said before, regarding Montenegro, I think it's more or less on the European interest rather than any other interest. So the response will come even if Montenegro is not a member of the European Union. However, the European Union has an interest in the area, and I'm sure it will do its best to assist Montenegro so as to recover.
There is another question from Gabor, who asks a very related question again. Basically, it's about the role of the European Union for the future geopolitical situation, international trade, and the economy. The question is, there are many problems inside the EU. How does it affect the competitiveness of the EU compared to China and the USA in a global scene? And I would like to focus this question more on the role of the European Union in this whole geopolitical concept. But also, there is a trade war between United States and China. Where do you see European Union being? From the economical perspective, how strong are we economically? How much we are in a good shape as a European Union, or not so much? So how do you see European Union in the global economy? in the future.
Okay.
Whom do you address the question first? Sorry.
Yes, so
You go.
You haven't heard the question, or?
I heard it, just I am wondering if you address the question to Professor Liargovas or to me.
I just asked it and hoped you would catch on. So yeah, maybe Professor Liargovas, I would love you to start with it, and then Professor Neszmélyi can add his point of view.
Okay. Regarding the European Union, and especially the Eurozone and the European Union, I think to date, it was 2 days ago, I think that the President of the European Commission gave the speech of the State of the Union, describing the priorities that the European Union will follow in the next year. And in this speech, I realize the decision by the European Commission to go ahead and do some changes, giving emphasis to the health sector, and spending a lot of money on this. Also to digitalization of firms. So another response is there will be a lot of investments on digitalization of European firms. And from what I remember, the President of the European Commission stressed a lot the role of the European Union in the global economy. She tried to convince the audience that the European Union will do its best to have a more active role in the global sphere. So digitalization, one priority, resilience, building resilience especially in the health sector, and spending a lot of money on research and innovation, and acting, having a more active role in the global economy. I think these are the priorities for the near future.
I would be interested in how we are doing with this, and how the European Union will be doing with especially the economy part, because the COVID affected different parts of the world differently. So how did European Union how does the European Union coming out of COVID in comparison to other countries or big powers around the world? Maybe Professor Liargovas, if you could just continue.
Yes, I think the response of the European Union to this crisis was much more effective than the response of the European Union to previous crises, economic crisis, for example. And an example of this is that currently most of the countries have recovered after the shock, after the crisis. Unlike in the economic crisis, it took many years for the countries to recover. So it was more effective way of responding. The European Union created this resilience fund, the resilience fund, which finances the recovery and the recovery of countries in the Eurozone, and spending a lot of money. And I think it in a way, European Union showed more solidarity as in the response of this current crisis, which was a new. It was something new because in the past we have not seen the European Union responding so quickly and taking measures, joint measures, as the European Union took this time. So I think it was, to my opinion, a successful response to the current crisis, with all this spending that took place and still is taking place in the next years in the countries especially in the Eurozone.
Interesting. I think in Europe we are like kind of self-critical or critical of the European Union in a way. I think there is a correlation with the democracy we have and the free media we can read, because in other countries in the world, and also like in the Czech Republic, we had communism, as many other countries did have in the 20th century. So there weren't free media, and everything seemed just great, and everything was done perfectly. Everything seemed to be growing, and the fact that we can read free media and we can get the information and maybe critical information towards the governments, it's a privilege. I would like to point because it's not certain in most part of the world. I would even say. So the role of the European Union in the future in a global politics, and how strong the economy is. And how does it? How stronger or weaker are we after COVID? What's your point of view, Professor Neszmélyi?
Thank you very much. I wish to point out that it is an unfortunate but true fact that in the recent decades, the role and the ratio of the European Union's economic performance in the global economy witnessed a continuous shrink. And just to recall the recent speech of Ursula von der Leyen, which the Hungarian foreign minister simply qualified as disappointing. I don't want to be so strict as I'm not a politician, but in fact, I don't really see still the main trends or the main directions how to break out from this situation. Just an example, Professor Liargovas mentioned the field of digitalization, which I fully agree, this is really a must. But do we really have in Europe a smart and good digital industry? What we use in majority, we are buying semiconductors from South Korea, from Taiwan, and all the appliances are made in China. How do we want to do an independent digital industry or digitalization? We are too much dependent on global partners, I think. My other remark, I really wish to avoid the political discussion now, but what I feel here in Hungary, it's a true fact. The European Union is too much occupied with artificially amplified, politically motivated problems, so-called problems, instead of focusing on the real problems, like the issue of migrants, what to do with them, should we let them in, should we integrate them, or should we refuse them, what should we do with the principle of state of law, what should we do with the sexual minorities and so on. So these are the main problems seemingly in the media, and not that much how to overcome the crisis. And okay, we can overcome sooner or later the crisis, but what will be the position of the European Union members after it? It cannot work that there are borders among the countries. It can happen, and in China, in fact, it happened that temporarily they made a lockdown in several Chinese provinces but I don't really think that for a longer run in the United States they can separate all the 50 states from each other with border control. That would make a similar economic crisis there. So what I find very important, that the European Union should be a single entity. I also don't want to make any judgment between the federalist or the sovereignty party politicians or thinkers. But it cannot work in a longer run that 27 different countries with different national economies, different taxations, different social security and salary levels. I would say that in terms of the economic cooperation, the story should be much more simple. This is, I think, the #1 precondition of economic efficiency. And I still could add something else, as it is well known that Germany is the first among the equal states, at least in terms of economy. So the German economy is a locomotive of the European Union, it is well known. And till the successor of Angela Merkel will not take the power, and it is still not known exactly who will be the person who takes over Angela Merkel's position. It is still, there is a big uncertainty factor of the recovery. This is my opinion. At least many countries are directly and strongly dependent on the German economy. Hungarian export and import, if I just mention as an example, by and large 28 to 30% the Hungarian export, and the similar figure of import is done with Germany. This ratio is extremely strong. In the socialist period, we had a similar ratio with the former Soviet Union. So Hungarian economy, probably the Czech or Slovak or other Central Eastern European economies are most likely similarly dependent on the German economy. I don't know the very case of Greece, but probably also the Greek economy has also an influence from Germany. Thank you. I think.
Professor Liargovas, do you wish to react?
Well, of course, there are many issues in front for the European Union. We are still far away from having a united Europe. I mean, we have a long way to go. But I think that small steps have been taken, and the crisis made the European Union more made stronger in terms of increasing the willingness, the political will to move forward, and do things together. We mentioned the example of digitalization, which of course in this Europe is left behind compared to US and China, but it will make the effort, for example, to increase, for example, digital spending by 20%, to overshoot the 20% target. It is important for Europe to invest in technological sovereignty, and because it depends a lot on chips, for example, from Southeast Asia, and therefore President von der Leyen announced a new European Chips Act. So it will invest a lot on research, design, and innovation, so as to increase its technological capabilities. But in the economic side, there is Europe needs to do, of course, much more things. For example, we have different taxation, as was mentioned. Still different taxation. We have the problems with the debt issue, for example, especially for Greece. This is a big issue, but some steps have been taken forward. This creation of the resilience fund depends on lending of the European Union as a whole from the world markets. So it's a kind of quasi Eurobond, which is a step forward to financial integration. We are not there yet. We are not there in the where everybody would like. I think we would like to go. But to remind you what Jean Monnet had said once, that Europe will take years, of course, and it will face a lot of obstacles, and will make a number of steps before achieving integration. Because the target is to have integrated markets, to have integrated policies, common policies, but this will not come at once. We will go there after going through many difficulties and overcoming many obstacles. So we are on the right path. Of course, Europe has learned a lot from previous experiences, has made mistakes, a lot of mistakes, especially in the economic, when facing the economic crisis. But it has gained experience, has learned a lot, and I think there is a political will now to move forward. So I'm not very much optimistic, but I am optimistic. I am optimistic that a lot of things will go forward. In the past, it was UK that was against some of the common policies, common issues. Now, I guess without the UK, Europe will move faster towards integration.
Professor Neszmélyi, do you want to shortly react to what you said?
Just very shortly, that it sounds really very, very nicely, and I would even fully agree with it, what Professor Liargovas mentioned. But to remain on the ground of reality, I think it is not so easy. There are still too many conflict of interests and too many, I think, useless discussion about smaller or bigger issues that does not really bring the European Union forward. There are still too much disagreement. Personally, me, contrary to many people, even in my country, I would be very happy if the European Union would merge to a federation. One citizenship, one passport, one taxation, one currency. But many people still following the other side to keep as much sovereignty of the nation states as possible and only just trade with each other. It is very difficult to make any judgment or somehow make a compromise between these two sides, as far as I can see.
Interesting question. Maybe it's a bit radical, but I will ask it anyway, because where the global world is going, if the European Union wouldn't be united and we would be just the national states, I will make a statement. I am happy if you would react. But if we don't unite, if we are just national states in the European Union, we don't stand a chance in front of the global powers and global economies of other countries. So the European Union going stronger together might be the solution, even though it's not ideal at all. Maybe Professor Liargovas, how do you see the European Union as one of the superpowers versus do national states in the European Union stand a chance in the global world?
I think it's being together is more powerful than being apart. I mean, it's so Europe needs to be together, to be united, in order to act as a global player. Otherwise, it will be that Germany, France, I don't know which country, which else, but there is only one way if Europe has to play a global role, to be united. This is my opinion.
Yes, let's move to maybe the solution part, because our discussion, the last part of the discussion, which we walked around and mentioned multiple times, some answers to it, is how to build resilience for similar situations in the future. I liked the few points from Professor Liargovas' presentation, and I might start it with quote which I wrote from the presentation, which is the solution is in diversification, not absolute self-reliance. You also talked, and we also mentioned the domestic firms doing better after COVID than the multinational big corporations. We mentioned the global supply chains falling apart, maybe going back to normal, whatever normal might mean. But I want to open the discussion as a conclusion to this panel, and what's the solution? And maybe let's start with the diversification versus self-reliance. Where is the optimum? Where is the limit? How do you look at it? Because there is not a clear line, of course. I just want to get your perspective on diversification versus absolute self-reliance, which is talked a lot about on a national level. So maybe both Professor Liargovas, if you could start with this.
Well, with the diversification, you mitigate risks. I think what firms need to do is to mitigate the risk, the exposure. And it's obvious, if you diversify your activities, both locally and internationally, not only internationally. In the past, it was only international participate in the global value chains, but you need to do both regional diversification, regional participation in the value chains, as well as international. This is the meaning of diversification. It means within and across countries, not just across countries, but also within countries, and of course, not being in absolute self-reliance. Nobody thinks that this is the solution, not self-reliance. Diversification in two ways, within and across countries, to mitigate the risks. I think that's the point for the future, because there will be more crises, no matter if they are health crisis or climate crisis or whatever, but you need to do this diversification.
Professor Neszmélyi, do you wish to react?
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, since David Ricardo described the principle of comparative advantages some time around the turn of the 19th century, I think it is very evident that it is good that that companies or countries are cooperating with each other, sharing the risk and sharing also the costs and possibly the benefit as well. I wish to fully rule out the principle of self-reliance, as any country who tried self-reliance by any kind of historical or political reasons did not really succeed. We can see the Soviet Union in the 1920s or 30s. We can have a look at North Korea, the principle of Chuche, national version of the some utopistic, I wouldn't say even that socialist or communist, some utopistic idea that a country, a small country without considerable amount of natural resources would be able to implement the self-reliance. It is really impossible. Neither the United States or North China can be self-reliant, I think, nowadays. But the other issue, which my professor at Sejong University in South Korea, when I made my MBA almost 20 years ago, explained the essence of the globalization. The globalization's purpose is how to make the bread bigger, which we are baking together. There is a synergy in cooperation, definitely. But I add this, what I add personally, that okay, let's make the bread bigger, but we should also benefit from the excess amount. It is very important if we make a bread from this, like a bigger one, how big piece we will get and how big piece we will share with others. And this is what I would say, that we can't expect equal treatment. We can't expect that countries staying at different levels of industrialization or economic development would benefit at an equal rate from the globalization or from the international cooperation. We used to say that, well, at the beginning of the takeoff period of the economic development, countries are dealing with labor-intensive production, and then continuing with the heavy industry, and just maybe decades later they can turn to the capital-intensive or knowledge-intensive, highly developed state-of-art technologies. I think most of the countries can reach the mid-level of industrialization, but it is very difficult to step forward. Japan and South Korea and the Taiwanese economy were very lucky. They could reach an advanced stage in the ages of the cheap oil, cheap energy carriers, and much more simple trade conditions than now. Now it is really, I would say, too much sophisticated, and the chances for a developing country or a country staying at a medium level of development, it is really very difficult to step forward and get equal or at least a reasonable share from the value chains. We are very happy, maybe Czech Republic, also Slovakia especially, that okay, a lot of car assembly plants were set up in our countries, and they contribute to the export and to the GDP. But when we examine that, what is the national share in this full value chain, we can recognize that beyond the labor cost, which is relatively low in the European Union in our countries, we don't really add too much. So I think we have to use as a ground of thinking how to continue. Also, if we think about the case in European dimensions, there are still rich countries, there are still poorer countries in the European Union. Definitely Greece, Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria cannot benefit that much from economic integration like Germany does, or Netherlands, or other countries in the West. What to do about it? There are different funds, cohesion funds and other regional funds that can facilitate the process of conversion. But still 30 years after the communist regime changed in Central East Europe, more than 15 years after Czech Republic, Hungary and other 8 countries joined the European Union, we still did not really see that the gap would shrinken. So what to do about it? I know it is a wishful thinking or a poetry question, but we have to answer this question before stepping forward. Thank you.
Yes, so now we are getting to the end of our discussion. I will just read the conclusions I gathered during the discussion for the future resilience and for the future generally. I actually summarized this with 3 points, and I would love you at the end to shortly react or maybe add something before we end the discussion. First point is that the inflation won't be a big deal. At least might not be since the beginning of next year. So the prices might still go up. They will be up till the end of the year, but the things will might go to normal quite quickly, maybe quicker than people might think. So the inflation might not be a big threat in the long run. Second, there is no normal. The world will just keep going. And third, diversification might be the most important tool to get ready for the future crises in every single area: health crisis, financial crisis, climate crisis, natural disasters. So diversification on every level, national, international, maybe even sector-wise, which we didn't mention, but diversification from an investor's perspective in that sense. So these are my notes, the conclusions from our discussion, which was very fruitful. There are much more. I just wanted to point the ones which are really sound to me personally. So Professor Liargovas, do you want to add something? Did I say it right?
The notes, I think the conclusions are well stated, and I don't think I have anything else to add. So I think it's okay.
Oh, thank you. Professor Neszmélyi, do you have anything to add, comment on?
Thank you very much. I fully agree with your 3 points as conclusion. I would just to urge more concrete, more target-oriented action plans from the European Union to make order in this issue for our common benefit. And as a matter of fact, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks for being invited to this discussion. I am sincerely glad that I get to know you through internet, Professor Liargovas and Dr. Bacíková as well. Thank you very much for listening to the audience as well, and the questions for people who were interested in our discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for coming, for joining us this year. We are looking forward to tomorrow's announcing the results. And also I would like to thank Ines because the international final round this year was supposed to be in Bratislava in person for a few days. We couldn't make it, obviously, because of the pandemic, but I want to thank Ines for co-organizing this event, and also my team, Martin Kutlak and David Martinez and Dagmar Birsakova, for making this technically possible. And I know it was a hard work, so thank you to all of you. Looking forward to all of you hopefully tomorrow. We will have our last day of the international final round. And I hope you will have a great day. And to the students who will get to the oral exam, I wish you luck and a lot of knowledge there. Thank you to everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.